Well, hi all and welcome. Thanks for being here. We've got some really wonderful folks I'm excited to introduce. I'm going to let them introduce themselves here in just a minute. But today we're going to be talking about what's been changing in terms of the college admissions in the last year. There have been lots of changes, and I'll say this: like some things have changed, and other things, and we'll get into this. Some things haven't changed. Some things will stay the same in this process. And I say that here early on because I think that sometimes, or at least there's probably like some increased anxiety about certain things, about like, oh, nothing is normal. But there are certain things, if you're a student going through this process, or if you're a parent helping a student go through this process, some of the things are going to be, similar to years past. So we'll get into that in a little bit. One of the questions I want to start off with in a few minutes is I want to hear about what has been surprising to you all as admission officers through this. We're going to talk a little bit about testing. We had some folks send questions in ahead of time. And by the way, if at any point y'all have questions, you can throw them in the chat box, and then closer to the end, within about 20-25 minutes to go, we'll get to some of those questions. We're going to talk about access and equity and how that's been impacted by the pandemic. What are y'all seeing as admission officers? We're going to talk about recommendation letters a little bit, how counselors and teachers can advocate for students even better, and how important those are in this process, especially now with things shifting around testing. We're going to give you some practical advice for students on how to set yourself up for a great process. And then, as I said, we're going to take y'all's questions. So let's start off with introductions. Deanna, I want to give it to you first. Just give us a quick intro and maybe like a little, if you really knew me at the end of it.
Okay, great. I'm happy to get things started. I'm Deanna Dixon. I am Dean of Admission at Smith College in Western Massachusetts. To be here, I've been in the world of college admission for 11, 12 years or so now. And let's see, what was that question?
If you really knew you, what would we know about you?
If you really knew me, you would know that I am hilarious. That seems insane to say, because who says that about themselves? But,
I love it. I love it.
Nobody knows that, though. So don't tell outside.
Don't tell anybody. You will keep your secret. Great. Thank you. Gigi, I'll let you go.
Oh, I really like Deanna already. My name is Gigi McGuire. I work at California State University, Northridge, or CSUN for short. And I'll talk more about what all that means later. But I am the Assistant Director for Partnerships and Initiatives, and I work in the Office of Student Outreach and Recruitment. So we work with admissions, but we are sort of the face of the campus, as opposed to the evaluators and all of that part. So if you really knew me, I'm gonna have to say, wow, you don't want me to tell all my secrets, do you?
We want vulnerability level like 5.
Okay, I'm gonna throw this one out there, and I'm not gonna answer any questions about it. Okay.
All right. Cool.
Okay. If you really knew me, I'm actually a lot older than I look, but I have really good genes that I pull from my parents and family stuff. So, not answering any questions about that.
A follow-up. That's fair. You got it. All right, Rick.
But I'm also kind of hilarious like Deanna.
I can tell.
All right. Rick Clark. I'm the director of undergrad admission at Georgia Tech, the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, Georgia. Of course, Smith and CSUN and Georgia Tech are always together, as you can imagine. I think those three are always commonly named together. People get kind of tired of it. But I've been here for 17 years. Before I was at Georgia Tech, I was down the street at Georgia State University, and then have also spent time at Wake Forest University. So Atlanta native. If you really knew me, you would know that I'm like juggling 8 balls at one time. And today is a very good indication of that, because I literally just made this webinar. My kids are doing a swim meet, and I had to like leave the car with my wife and ride my bike to get back here. So I'm glad we're not in person, to be honest with you, because I've got the fan going back there. I don't even smell. I wouldn't want anyone else to smell me. Let's say that. That's vulnerability 7.
That's vulnerability 7. Yes. Well, this is great. And I want to, you make a great point there, Rick, that folks who are coming onto this webinar might have some sense of, colleges, and here are folks on the screen that represent these different schools, but they may not have a really clear sense of what differentiates. So maybe let's do one more round real quick, and maybe we could just spend maybe a minute or so given some of the, I don't want to mean the bullet points like student to faculty ratio, but what makes a Smith different from a CSUN versus a Georgia Tech, et cetera. So maybe Deanna, you can start us off with what is it that makes Smith special? And so that folks can sort of, again, because some folks come into this process they may not have heard of something, not here, right? But they might not have a clear sense of what sets these schools, set your schools apart. So give us a sense of each of your schools, the sort of, short version.
Yeah, so you're starting with me.
Yes.
Yeah, and the big thing, at least in this group, that sets us apart is that Smith is a women's college. So we are about 2,500 undergraduate students. Women's college, as I mentioned, we are in Western Massachusetts in what's called the Pioneer Valley. We are in a consortium of schools, so called the 5-College Consortium. So it's Smith, Mount Holyoke College, which is also a women's college, also Hampshire College, Amherst College, and the flagship UMass State School, University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Couple other things that sets us apart is that, at least among women's colleges, is we're the only one with an open curriculum. So that is could be of interest to some folks in our audience, students especially, if you want to hear more about what an open curriculum means. And we are the first of 2 women's colleges with our own engineering program. So it just kind of speaks to the value of educating our young women. So I'll leave it there. I might have taken up a minute. I'm not sure.
That's beautiful.
Pass along to somebody else.
Nailed it. Nailed it. Gigi.
I like it. So what would be unique or different, or what makes CSUN kind of, different, is that we are a part of a 23 campus system called the California State University system. And that's actually the largest system of higher ed in the United States. So all 23 of our campuses are 4-year bachelor's, master's, doctorate, offering, degrees that we offer. And CSUN is actually one of the larger campuses. I think we rest at about the 4th largest at around 38,000 students. So while our system will ask for the same kind of information, same kind of general criteria to be eligible, some of our campuses are a lot more selective than others. And then we range in size. Our smallest campus is about 1,000 students. The largest one is a little over 40,000. So we're all throughout the state. If you ever saw a map of the state of California, or if you're from California, you know that it's a big state. And we are spread out from Humboldt, which is close to Oregon, all the way down to San Diego State, which is right near the Mexican border. So we were pretty spread out. But California is very rich in higher ed, so we count that as a kind of a privilege. I mentioned the CSUs. We have the UCs, the University of California. Y'all know the little campus near me called LA, UCLA. And then we have about 84 private and independent schools like Stanford and Pepperdine and USC, Phi-don, So we have a lot of colleges here in California. So, but the CSUs are one of the system that's public, 4-year, state-funded university, and we have a ton of great alumni that are doing some fabulous things. So CSUN is part of that huge family of Cal States. Beautiful. I guess that answered your question.
Beautiful. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So Georgia Tech, again, thinking about 4,000 schools in the country, one of the things that differentiates us is we are pretty much smack dab in the middle of the capital city of the South. So economy all runs out of here, business, technology, everything runs out of Atlanta. And Atlanta's first name was Terminus, basically meant intersection. So Indian trails became railroads, became highways. It's a big hot mess now, but the bottom line is that Atlanta has always been an intersection, and that is the intersection of lots of different things. At Georgia Tech, I think that's the intersection really of STEM and ROI. I would argue that more than maybe any other school in the country, STEM and ROI come together at Georgia Tech, unlike any other place. we started, Reconstruction South, right? And the whole purpose of existence. And this is a great question, I think, for students to be asking, like what you said, Ethan, like, why are you there? Why do you exist? What's your mission? What makes you different, right? Georgia Tech was started at a time where I think the future was very uncertain, especially in the South. Like, you're coming out of the Civil War, like what's going to be next? How are things going to look from a transportation standpoint, from an economy standpoint, et cetera? Georgia Tech's mission was to think about what was coming, right? And to look beyond what was and imagine a better future. And I would argue really that, all these years later, that's exactly who we still are. It's the kind of kid that we attract, right? The student who's just a big time question asker. They will frickin' why you to death, right? Why are you wearing that? Why did you just say that? Why isn't this cheaper? Why isn't this faster? But the cool thing about Georgia Tech students is like, we don't teach philosophy. So, we got 36 majors, makes us different than a lot of other schools. We're not the flagship. We're not comprehensive. We're very lean in that regard. Don't have philosophy. So why is never the last question. It's kind of the first question, followed by how and who are we going to kind of do this, right? So, Georgia Tech in a lot of ways produces, white collar talent with a blue collar work ethic. That's who we are. That's what we're about. And I think that's kind of who we've always been. Thank you.
So I want to ask this question. I want to hear from everybody on this one. The other ones we can kind of go specifically. Maybe we'll start with you, Gigi. But was there anything that surprised you this year as an admission officer, somebody working in this field?
Well, there was so much about 2020 that was alarming, obviously. But I was a little surprised, I'd say, that students didn't. We heard from a lot of students with very general, very similar questions, I'll say. But I was a little surprised that we didn't get more, to be honest, and that there were still a lot of mistakes made, in the application process because the students, and I don't know if it's because the student just wasn't connected to the people that have the information, or maybe there was a lot of assumptions being made based, possibly by parents, possibly by counselors. But the other thing that when we offered ourselves to answer those questions, people didn't show up. And so that kind of surprised me. Places where I would have gone in person and seen a couple of hundred people at once, I only saw maybe 20, when it was virtual. And I get it, everyone's zoomed out, but I was surprised at that we weren't, we kind of scrambled to make ourselves available and then people just didn't show up. So that was kind of, I'll say that I was really surprised about that.
Yeah. Yeah. What about for you, Deanna?
Oh, I would say the biggest thing that surprised me, because it went counter to what we were prepared for. The biggest thing that surprised me was how resilient students are. They, as we all know, with the pivot in, at least from this last cycle, their junior year, and then, learning remotely, the impact of the pandemic, which was a question if students use the Common Application, and even the Coalition, actually, there was a question on there, the Coalition app, that students just, dug deep. I think they showed up in this process in a way that surprised me. Mm-hmm. And, we were prepared as a staff to, approach our reading process with flexibility and, a deeper understanding, which I think we do anyway. We were just extra prepared for that and trying to gauge what we were going to read about. And, students just talked about how they pulled through. Some students didn't answer that question, but we saw in either their academic record or recommendations, really how hard students work to be able to get to the point where they're applying to college and ready. So that was the biggest thing that surprised me.
Thank you. All right. I guess I'm going to say, am I echoing?
A little bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think the thing that goes through my head a little bit is it surprises and convicts me that we colleges, certainly Georgia Tech, hadn't done a better job. It took this for us to learn a lot of lessons. For instance, the way that we showed up virtually, brought students into these online, panels and faculty and making them more available. Now, maybe it is the pandemic. That's what it took, right? To get people on campus to kind of show up and do these kind of things. But, it was very convicting to realize like we hadn't put out very good online content in the past. And I know you mentioned a little bit about sort of access and inclusion, and that was very convicting to think. We talk and think so much about this, but we were in a lot of ways doing things so conventionally about who we go out and see and who can come to us. And yeah, we had a couple things online. We had did like the status quo stuff, like a recorded information session. It wasn't that good. I mean, I think colleges all over the country have, there wasn't, and that's my fault, But I do think that if you're sitting here as a parent or a counselor or a kid that is a sophomore or a junior, like in a way, thank goodness for the pandemic, for what it has kind of pushed, I think, colleges to create and provide. And that long term is a good thing, right? So, what are those like never go backs and what are those keep forevers from the pandemic? The hybrid, while everyone is zoomed out to an extent, this hybrid is critical. I mean, Georgia Tech had not stepped foot on soil in Arkansas in like 12 years, as far as recruitment was concerned. But we were able to have, visits with kids, from Arkansas as a result of this, and countries all over the world that we just don't have the budget, the time, the resources to go see. So that's a long answer, but I think it's really important for people to take note of, take advantage of, going forward.
I want to talk a little bit about testing, which I think is related to this access and equity theme, but I want to ask it in two parts. And so I think I'm going to kind of lob the question, and whoever feels like speaking to it can speak to it. But I want to know, what was it like putting together based on, and you might give context about where your school is at with testing so that folks have that context. So what did you learn about testing? What was it like putting together a class of students, in many cases, without tests? And then the second part of the question is for the practical, for students who are sitting right now, getting ready to apply, they're wondering, should I test or should I not test? So I want to know like the sort of behind the scenes, what was it like? And then practically speaking for students, what should they then do? And anybody can answer.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. What it was like for us, the good thing, I guess you could say, about the Cal States is that we don't use the Common App and we don't ask for essays. We're not like, reading all the different things that Ethan will prepare you to write for everywhere else. But so we really solely go on your grades. Well, it has to be a certain courses, the grades in those courses, and your GPA. So, and of course, weighted GPA will give points towards honors and AP and all that. But without that, those test scores, we have these formulas, one for the SAT, one for the ACT. We create what we call an eligibility index. But without that, that's half the formula. So we had to recenter all of that and create a whole new, way of adding it up. So basically, we raised our minimum GPA for the whole system from a 2.0 to a 2.5. But then there's at least, 16, 17 campuses out of the 23 that you had to have a higher than that 2.5 to get in. And then some campuses, it was much higher, depending on the major. We have something we call impaction. So if you went for an impacted major, it had to be even higher, So, and here's what was kind of weird about it this year. Each campus got to say, well, we're going to use these other factors in consideration. So let's say if this student was eligible for a fee waiver, or they were on free or reduced lunch, or maybe they were involved in extracurricular activities. So everyone was able to say, like, take a few items off of a menu and say, well, we don't have the test score, so we're going to use this and these 5 things, or these 10 things, or these other 2 things, or whatever, So it became very hard to. Normally we could talk about each other pretty easily. We could say, oh yeah, I'm from CSUN, but I know Cal Poly's doing that, and San Diego State is doing that, and San Francisco State is doing that. But it was very difficult this time, because it was like, I just know what we're doing, because everyone else is somewhere in this realm, but they've chosen different factors to look at. And I know it drove the counselors crazy. It did. We tried to help them as much as we could, but we were confused, to be honest. So we're going to be better this fall. Don't worry. Okay. But it was very difficult to really just say yes or no to a question. It was all about, well, what depends on the campus, depends on what you're doing, where you're applying and what major and all of that. So We are officially, though, test blind for the class of 21 and 22. So class of 22, you will not need test scores. We won't look at test scores. Let me say it that way. We are not looking at test scores for admissions. The UCs just have that same, I don't know if you read in the news, but they just had a case go through a whole, legal matter, but they're not going to be using SATs and ACTs either. So for the California public schools, you don't need tests. Now people will say, well, we're just going to send it in case. We don't use them. It's like when you send us a headshot, it goes in the shredder. We're not using that stuff. We don't need a headshot to apply.
You get headshots?
I don't know.
It's California.
Right. Everybody's
people
got
have them. They have them. We don't use them for admissions, folks. It doesn't matter how cute you are. It does not, But so we're not using test scores. So you're gonna hear that a lot coming from the California schools, at least the public schools. The private schools might be sort of like, well, if you send it, we'll use it. If you don't, it's not a knock against you, because we're trying to be as fair as possible. But it was very strange, and we're still kind of wrapping our head around what's going to happen in the next few years. And, and I think that change was coming anyway, but this forced it earlier, I think that change was already being discussed at pay rates much higher than mine. But I think this made everyone say, okay, you can't actually take a test, so therefore we can't ask for it. So here we are. The future came faster. So I think that's how it's going to look for a while or forever in California. I don't know.
Thank you. I'm curious to hear from Deanna or from Rick. What about for you all? What was it like?
I'm going to let Rick go because we were already test optional. So I don't know if I'm so have that change in that way. So
yeah, sure. No, happy to go. I guess for Georgia Tech, we had not been test optional prior to the pandemic, although honestly, we had been leaning and putting less and less weight on tests as the years have gone on, just because of just the other factors that we had, right? I mean, the deep kind of dives that we do take into where a student goes to school, what they have access to, what their grades are, what their trends are. I mean, that's where we really spend most of their time. So it didn't feel like a big deal to us in terms of, whether a student had a score or not, or what that score was, because there's so many other pieces. I mean, I mentioned earlier that Georgia Tech is very STEM heavy and also doesn't have a lot of majors. So, 94% of our students that enter typically have calculus or higher. And as a lot of the students and parents, counselors certainly on the call know, I mean, the SAT math barely touches pre-calc, right? So a kid's, sitting here with linear algebra or applied combinatorics. I mean, they're taking math I can't even spell. I'm pretty sure they would do just fine on a SAT math. So that didn't bother us, Georgia Tech, too much. Now, one other piece of your college search and something in general that I think is very important right now on a lot of levels is understanding the difference between public schools and private schools. And even as a high school student, it's you generally have a sense of this, right? Decisions are made centrally, oftentimes for systems, which we just kind of hit on in California, right? A decision was made for that system, and Berkeley or UCLA or CSUN or Fullerton are part of that system, and they're going to go with the decision that's made. Now, here in Georgia, a very different decision has just recently been made, which backs to access. The way that our Board of Regents looks at this is Georgia students can now get the test again. Things are back open, kids can take the test. So they have said, look, we made the decision to go away from this because they couldn't get the test. All right. Now they can, the test is going to be required. And I think that's really important because, it's a lesson in the fact that American higher education is vast and diverse, and that's a good thing. But they're not all the same, and the expectations need to be different. This is also true, and I think it can be helpful in your college search. Like, people will want statements to be made when things happen, right? Death of George Floyd, bam, a lot of private schools come out very fast with statements. You notice publics always lag. This is true almost always on things because checks have to happen, right? President is still ultimately kind of responsible up to system. And so there's so many things I think that are really helpful, how you allocate your money, how you can or can't provide aid. Some of that's dictated by systems. And I think that that's just really helpful and important for people to know as they talk with schools and ask questions. And maybe that's going to be part of your decision on where you choose to go to college or not, right? But that's kind of where we are, and I think how things are moving forward for us in the year ahead.
One question I know students are going to have in the back of their minds is like, okay, but should I still test? Right? Like you say test optional, Deanna, but should I really? I mean, yeah, what does optional mean, right? So I'm going to kick this one to you, Deanna. Like for the students who are thinking, should I still test? What do you say to them?
I'm going to go with the "it depends" answer, and I say that because the schools that are test optional really are test optional, meaning that your test score is not required to be for admission purposes, right? So that you can choose to submit your testing or not, or have your test sent to the institution or not, and you will not be penalized in the process for not supplying your test. I'll say before I answer that particular question, I wanted to add something to the conversation, and that is that test optional is not new. The pandemic has created an environment where many institutions have become test optional due to the lack of ability for students to take tests, and it just, I would argue that's a good thing. But there were many institutions that were test optional before the pandemic. And there is a collection of schools that you can find on fairtest.org that are test optional and were test optional before. What I would say to directly to that question, should students take the test or not? There are some instances where even if the institution is test optional, the testing may still be required for scholarships, say. So that's where the "it depends" comes in, is that you want to do a little bit of your research on schools that you're interested in, if it's required for admission, or if testing is also required to be considered for, say, merit scholarships, or you might be applying for outside scholarships that also require testing. So there's a little bit more involved in making that decision than just a yes/no answer, should I take the test or not?
Mm-hmm. Since I've got you here, Deanna, I want to ask you, will you say, I'm shifting gears here, but we talked about this and I wanted to make sure that you talk about this. Will you say a little bit about the importance of recommendation letters in this process, especially given that, as I don't know who was saying it, Rick was saying it, that like other pieces of the puzzle were, have become more important. Will you just say a little bit about recommendation letters, and, feel free to speak to counselors directly here if you want.
Happy to talk about recommendation letters. In our process, they're important for us to get a sense of, who you are as a student outside of, say, what your transcript is going to tell us, right? So it is, for the student's point of view, it is important in our process so that we get a chance to get to know you outside of that, that transcript. So someone is speaking about you or writing on your behalf to tell us what kind of person you are, what kind of student you are. So that's information that we can't glean from a transcript. To counselors, I would say that there is some information, at least in our process, that is most important for us to know about, or most helpful in the process. And that is for us to get a sense of really what is the student like in the classroom. So it's more of an academic letter of recommendation rather than a personal one, right? We read a lot of recommendations where we read about a lot of personal qualities about the student, and that's great because we are building a community. We want to know that we are admitting, nice students, but we also want to know if they're going to be able to, handle the rigor of our classroom environment. Are they the type of student who's going to, move discussions along, or are they, or do they work well in groups or alone or both, or are they, classroom leaders? Are they missed when they're absent from class? Those types of comments about a student is most helpful to us when we're reading an application, because we can then put that student in our classrooms. We can picture that student in our classrooms and get a sense of whether they will academically thrive, versus recommendations that really are centered on personal qualities, or telling us something that we already know in the application. So for instance, a repeat of what's on the extracurriculars. We know who's the team captains. We know who are presidents of their clubs because we see that in the application. So we want to get a little bit deeper than that. And I will say that a short recommendation can supply that same information. It doesn't have to be, 2 pages long. It could be still a page. I'd even argue for bullet points, quite frankly. I appreciate those because they're easy to read. We can quickly see the information that is helpful to us. And I would imagine they're easier to put together on the counselor end.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask a super leading question. We were talking a little bit about, and you mentioned there was a bias that you didn't say was a pet peeve, but sometimes when they're talking about female applicants, will you say a little bit about that?
Yes, I did say that. I might have even used the word pet peeve.
Will you say just a little bit about that? Because I want counselors to hear that from you.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that I find that's interesting, I said before, I'm from Smith College. We're a women's college. And it is interesting to read recommendations for our applicants that read with very feminine language. And the language might, again, back to even personal qualities, we might read a lot of, sweets, something that's more, not the hard driving academic language, so I oftentimes find myself questioning if this counselor or this teacher, for that matter, were writing the same letter on behalf of a male identified student, would they use the same language as they use when they're writing about a female identified student? The language just tends to be more feminine. It not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but we also want to know some of the hard driving stuff too, and the gender neutral language. How about that?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Yes, everybody's just nodding. I want to ask you. I want to kick this one to you, Rick. What are some things that students can do? And you've written a whole book on this, I know. But students and let's say families can do to really set themselves up for a great application process.
Yeah, I think that this is not trying to take the easy way out. Actually, I think it's probably one of the hardest things to do. But just really committing to listen to one another. Really, truly listen, and carving out time each week, especially in that kind of latter part of the junior year and entering into that senior year where you allocate time to talk about college. And then you're super disciplined the rest of the week to not talk about college. Because at the end of the day, like that ultimate experience, let's say it's 4 years, 5 years on a college campus somewhere. We're talking about a lifelong relationship. Like that is so much more important of having a healthy, again, respectful exchange of, ability to listen to one another. And you'll just find, I kind of call it the conversation creep, right? Where it's Tuesday night, you just got picked up from practice and mom's got like a brochure where she's handing it over to the kid, like, doesn't Notre Dame look pretty in the fall kind of thing? And the kid just wants to get home and he's got a test the next day kind of thing, whatever. And you come downstairs for a snack in the middle, 10 o'clock at night, like, do you finish that essay? It's just not good for the relationship. And it goes both ways. And so I think that the two things I would say is, one is carve out that time. You agree on it and everybody's got some ground rules and there's like a meeting, right? Sunday from 3 to 4, we're going to hold that time. This is when we talk about it. Everything's on the table. Kids got to reply with like strung together multisyllabic words called sentences, maybe even some inflection, no snacks, no phones. Just a legit conversation. I think that's important. And then the other thing is money, and just talking about money early. And I think probably my colleagues could attest to this, but damn, it is just the worst when it is like April of the senior year and you are in the middle, whether it be virtually or in person. Actually easier virtually. So I'm like, oh, I just dropped that call. I'm sorry. But in person, when they have clearly never had this conversation. And now it's like the kid's in, they're like wearing the t-shirt. They posted on Instagram already that they're going. And the financial package is sitting there being basically used as a tissue because everybody's crying into it. And there was never a conversation around, but if you have that conversation early, if you have that conversation as a sophomore or a junior and you say, sweetheart, I love you. And yeah, sure, we could pay this amount. We're just not going to because we don't want to retire when we're 74. We want to be able to take vacations. I think parents, and I put myself into this category, like sometimes we underestimate our kids' ability to handle things, but we think we're like helping them, protecting them. But then ultimately real stuff like money hits. And man, we're just so much better off of ripping that Band-Aid off, having the conversation, being honest, and getting out in front of it before an application is ever submitted.
Thank you. I want to stay on money for just a minute because a couple of questions have come in from folks asking about financial aid and what the impact, if there's been an impact based on the pandemic on financial aid. And in particular, someone's asking about international students. So maybe Gigi, I'll go to you first. What are you seeing in terms of, how has financial aid, and it might be good to give just a little bit of context about financial aid, for example, works at the Cal States. And, and so we can talk maybe both domestic and for international students.
Well, because, the Cal States are a state, funded system, obviously anyone who's a resident in the state gets a little bit of a break because they're not paying for the full cost of educating them. So an in-state resident, and this is pretty much the same everywhere, but the in-state resident really is only paying about a third of what it costs. So, but because of that, they also get, college costs money. It's not, community colleges are free basically, but not the universities. So what'll happen is that our state, all of our schools will offer the federal, we have applications, you use FAFSA to apply for the federal aid. And then we have something called the Cal Grant. So that's the California, and there's some other monies that come out of California just for, state funding to students. Some of those would be dependent based on your income, or if you're a ward of the court, let's say, if you're a foster child, if you, lots of other factors that you might find yourself in different categories that might be eligible for other state funding. But in general, if a person fills out the FAFSA, then the campuses will use all the information they ask for, federal tax forms, state stuff, everything. They'll determine how much the student is eligible for, how much is the EFC, for the family contribution. And then, because our price is not that high, a lot of students do get funded. So our campus, for instance, about 90% of the students have some type of aid. Now that will include loans, but a lot of those are very low interest rate and it's affordable for a student. Now, obviously there's scholarships, but a lot of scholarships will come from private donation, private people that you can find on any scholarship search. But then the campus itself is also a distributor of certain scholarships. So at that campus, you might have an opportunity for a scholarship from this one family that is given all this, this endowment, So you really have to look to see what does the campus have, available to you to give, for students. Now, I did learn this as a parent. Can I flip my hat just a second?
Please.
I've done this job forever, ever and ever. And then finally, my daughter gets old enough to apply to college. And of course, she wants to go to USC.
Which is cheap, right?
Do you know how cheap it is for you to go to my campus? That's another conversation. Okay. But we wanted her to have the opportunity because her grades, she took AP exams. She did very well. And it's like, you should be rewarded for your hard work. I understand that. Now, as a professional and a parent, kind of with the split thing going on, I learned that private schools can actually award academic excellence better than the public school. That's my opinion. Don't at me, as they would say. Okay. So what I've learned is, she was an honor student. She had all these AP, her GPA was high because of the AP courses, AP exams, all of that, and the private schools that she applied to, one in California, one in Texas, one in Arizona, two in California, actually, they wanted to award it, so her package was going to be much bigger going to a private school that cost more than it was to go to a public school that didn't cost as much. That's weird, right? And then even when you look for scholarships, a lot of times I know when I was growing up, I used to understand that, if you get the better grades, you get the more scholarships. That's true, but it doesn't mean it in general, because some of these private scholarships are also asking for you to demonstrate need. So really the better scholarships come from the campus you're going to be attending. Okay. Can I tell you, I was, you see on Facebook or something, how old were you when you found this out? And I was like 2 years ago old when I found out that when students would say, oh, I earned $400,000 in scholarships. And I'm like, how is that even possible? You mean you can get a bachelor's, a master's, a doctorate, and a few degrees? I didn't understand until I had to go through it with her. You can only spend what you're going to get from the college you go to. So yes, you can earn all of the, and most parents don't know that. I'm just letting you know.
You don't get rollover dollars from the other office?
You don't get so if in her case, if USC offers you this and Cal Lutheran offers you that and University of Arizona offers you that, you can add it together, but you can't spend all of that. You can only spend the one that you chose, ma'am.
I can't take my Walmart gift card to Target, is what you're telling me.
Exactly.
All right.
You can't do it. You can't do it. I know, right? And so like a lot of people think, oh, that means you get but you still have to choose where you're going to go and spend it. So there's a lot of money out there from different sources and all of that. Some of them are scams. I don't recommend those, but when it comes to actual financial aid from the government, then fill out that FAFSA. That's the best way to do it. And give yourself that option of all the schools that you're applying to, because your packages are going to look different based on the price tag, based on what major you're in, based on your GPA. It could be a lot of things that determine that. So international students would have also another category. So of course they wouldn't be eligible for the stuff that comes from the state, but there's some other funding that happens for international students. So everyone should always just kind of identify where they are and find out what are the things that are your options that are available to you. Another thing I didn't say about California is that California and the Western United States, we have something called WUI, which stands for the Western Undergraduate Exchange. And so it's like 6 or some more states. But anyway, it's like Arizona and Colorado and Washington, Oregon, Hawaii, California, So depending on the major you select, we will say in this sort of agreement, if you come from one of those states and you want to come to our campus, then we'll give you a discount. And it won't be this huge out-of-state price tag. It'll be closer to the in-state. It'll be a little higher than the in-state, price, but at least that allows non-residents to, within those states to get, an education maybe nearby without spending as much money. So all of those are options that are out there. And I really encourage students and families to do your research and figure out where you fall, and what's out there for you. Don't be afraid to write an essay to get a scholarship. I mean, we're not going to give out scholarships for name and address and email, You got to write a good essay and you got to talk about something. Let's have something to say that no one else is saying. That's all I'm saying. I don't know.
I want to talk about essays for a minute. And so, Deanna, I want to give you this next question. And while I'm asking Deanna this question, I want to invite Rick and Gigi. I'm going to invite you to do an odd thing, but look at our Google Doc that's got kind of the questions that have come in. And once Deanna has answered this question, I'm going to let you all sort of follow your curiosity in terms of any of the questions that have come in and say, okay, I want to answer this question. So I'm going to let you all pick the next question, either one of you. Deanna, someone asked, if something quote unquote traumatic happened to you, should you include it in your college essay? An easy one.
This is how I will answer that question. I will not say that you should include it or not include it, but I would challenge the student to think about if you want to, if you are defining yourself by the trauma that you might be inclined to write about. I think that, there may be some other qualities about you as a person that you want to highlight and share and let us know about, because that might be more of who you are. And that might be more of the person that you would be bringing to our community versus the person who has been traumatized by an event or a situation. This question sometimes leads to, the idea of, and this was just written about actually in the New York Times, the student who wrote about selling her pain recently in the last few weeks, and really feeling not so good about feeling like she was kind of encouraged to do that. So I like to read about a student outside of what their traumatic experience or their pain might be, because I believe that, students are more than that, and that they can share much more about who they are as a person, what they value, what their goals are. It could be just a compelling story about something that happened, not the trauma, but just something that brings them joy. What brings you joy? So especially in a time like this, where people are recovering in a lot of ways to what COVID has done to us, it's refreshing to read about what brings you joy. Yeah. So I would challenge students to really think about how you want to be known in the college process. And if you come to decide that, well, I really want to write about this traumatic experience because I can write about how I've grown from it, what I've learned from it, and that becomes the crux of your essay, not the trauma, but the growth and who you have become as a result of that recovery. That certainly is fine to write about. But I don't want students to think that we are looking for a trauma story, because we're not looking for a trauma story. We're looking for your story. We're just looking to see, and read about and understand who you are. So I would challenge students to think deeply about that first before they think about writing about the traumatic story. But make sure you write about how you've grown from it if you do write about it.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. And for students who are interested in figuring out, well, how do I figure out what those other pieces of me are? On Tuesday, and maybe Ashley, you can put in the link, we're doing a webinar specifically on how do you figure out what your personal statement topic is. There is a little piece that I'll talk about if you're writing about challenges, how to do that, but how do you figure out what your topic is? I'm going to go through 7 different options for y'all. So stay tuned for that next week. Rick, before we move on to whatever else you or Gigi found interesting, I want to ask, Georgia Tech changed their essays last year, switched things up a little bit. I'd love to just hear a little bit about that for folks who may be curious about that shift for you all.
Yeah, so last year we decided not to look at the Common App application essay. So basically we felt like, a lot of students are going to use the COVID explanation question. And we also have our own 2 supplementary questions. One of those is basically, like a lot of schools, kind of why Georgia Tech, right? But specifically, why do you want to study this major at Georgia Tech? And so that was, in the end, I think that our staff kind of missed not having the Common App essay as well. But the thought behind it was, look, if we're trying to gauge a student's ability to write, we've got them writing plenty. And we don't want them to write more for us than is necessary. However, the way it played out really was, with so many of our crossover schools using the Common App, most of the students were already doing it, so it was coming in anyway. That was our kind of premise for it. And this coming year, the Common App is again going to have that. How did COVID impact your experience? I think that makes a ton of sense. I wouldn't be surprised if they even keep it another couple of years. At least for the first of the freshmen, right, to go all the way through their experience. So yeah, that was kind of how we went.
Cool. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Gigi, what did any of those questions draw your attention? Anything you find interesting that you're drawn to?
I'm scrolling through some of the.
If you didn't, I got Rick as backup here too. Rick, did you find anything? If not, I can pick something.
I had one from Louisa. It was about GPA. I think, let me just read her exact question. It says, is GPA a big factor in the admission decision? Because a lot of students' GPA went down because of the pandemic. This goes back, and of course, this is half the reason I'm in college admission, is because you can pretty much answer any question. It depends, and then just walk away. It doesn't work at home quite as well as it works on the stage. Like, can I have dessert? It depends, and then just walk out. So, I might try that with my 9-year-old later tonight. Anyway, I think that, it's a great question, Louisa, and it does depend, right? Because we just talked about, the Cal State system. And here in Georgia, we have something called the freshman index, right? And so it operates very similar to the way the Cal State system was described, which is GPA is huge. And yes, there's some things that calculate in, but that is going to be a core piece. I would say most people in college admission would tell you, yes, it's important. Of course, it's a huge part of, and really a great predictor of how you'll do in college. At the same time, one of the other important things for people in general to know, and Louisa, I would hope you walk away from this knowing, is we get paid and we train our staff to make sure that they understand context. I mean, context is everything. Where do you go to school? What did you have access to? You know, did you switch schools a couple of times? Did your school change their grading scale? Do you weight your APs or not weight your APs? Do you not offer them? Do you limit the number of APs you can take? This is what we do, right? This is where we spend time. And this is the thread that ties I was kind of joking earlier about these three schools and how different they are, which is awesome that we're together. But these are the kind of threads that tie us together is, you know, we put value on and time into understanding context. And so your concern about GPAs dropping, you're right. We saw that. And another thing we saw, and Georgia Tech focused a lot on math, as I said earlier, but we saw a number of students who would have been tracked, if you will, or normally from a certain high school, let's say, taken the next level up in math, not do that as seniors. Now, I'm expecting this class coming up as juniors, like probably to have a similar experience where they might not be as progressed as the same kid from that high school 3 years ago who didn't have a disruptive experience. It's a long way of saying, yes, GPA matters. However, more important takeaway message is context is everything, and we dig deep to figure out what has happened. And look, global pandemic, I mean, both those things, global and pan, both mean all. We do understand, we get it, and we're asking those questions to understand your experience. However, part of your job as an applicant, if you feel like that's not being communicated, is to communicate it. And our applications provide you an opportunity to do that, as I just said, from that COVID question that's on the application.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of questions about test scores in this. And there's a lot of opinions about stuff.
This is every webinar, Gigi. Every webinar.
You got some real opinionated folks in the audience. Power to you all.
I try to talk about other things, and it comes back to test scores.
Some of it is, I don't know, I want to call it a myth. Some of it is very, very mythical. Very like somewhere along the way, we were convinced that this is the way it was. Mm-hmm. And some of this stuff just isn't true. Mm-hmm. So, and I'll give you an example. Like someone said, you know, like they're asking about AP scores, because some people think that, I mean, maybe there are some colleges that use AP scores in admissions. Usually AP scores are the things that allow students to, you know, kind of get college credit. Like you got a 4 in this AP, you know, calculus exam. Therefore, you don't have to take that calculus class, for instance. The scores are not typically used in admissions, that part of it. So, I mean, there might be some schools, like I said, but I have not seen that. So, you know, that's just interesting to me how people say, you know, they just don't know the nuances. I know that. I get it. And so therefore, the world is out there telling y'all how to get into colleges. It's not the people that get paid to do it. That's what I've learned. People listen to more people that they just know, as opposed to who got, and I used to say that when I was younger, because I was kind of like, you know, I would say, did somebody who gets paid to tell you? Did a professional tell you that? Well, if not, then why are you believing your cousin and your auntie that went there 10 years ago and your teacher that went there 25 years ago? It's not the same way. Every year is different. It can be very different. So, you know, everyone calm down. That's my general tip. Everybody calm down. It's not the end of the world. You've gone through harder things than applying to college. We just came through, like, we're still in the pandemic. You know what I mean? So relax. We've been through harder things than filling out an application. It's okay. I love what Rick said. Talk about it that 1 hour on Sunday. Let's calm down. Mm-hmm. Okay. After that part, just the whole idea of test scores. Yeah, I read someone said, you know, fairness and all of that. And why do people still think it's elitist, classist, racist? There's a whole political thing. We can have this whole conversation about testing. It's the subject matter in the test questions that make it elitist or classist. If I know a student who's never been to a ski resort and the question uses a ski resort, as the analogy, they're going to be behind. They're not going to know how to answer that. So there you go. Okay. But aside from that, when the student is, I love what Rick and Deanna both said, tell us about you. Even though I don't ask for, our campus doesn't ask for an essay, we're reading, other essays come in because of scholarships and opportunities to be involved in programming or, different types of success programs that might require you to actually apply for. You have to be authentic. The authenticity is what's going to win you over. If they ask you a simple question like, what's the first song on your playlist right now? Don't try to overthink it and make up something you think the person's going to want to hear. What's on your playlist? Answer the question. Maybe the test isn't following the instructions. We can tell that you haven't. When we get to question number 20, if you skipped question 11, then the question 20 is going to be wrong. You were wrong a long time ago. So now it's wrong.
Yeah.
So, and I can always tell when a student calls and says, oh, I have a question about the application. I glued on this. I don't know why it won't let me submit. Okay, let's go all the way back to where you built your profile. Mm-hmm. You said you were a transfer student because you're a high school student with college work. You're not a transfer student. So let's fix that. And then everything else goes. So it's really about let's just take it one step, one breath at a time. We can all get through the process. It's not that hard. I've seen it a million times. Students have done it. Okay. Students smarter and not so smart as you, smarter and not as smart, I'll say, have done it. It's fine. You don't have to worry about it. The real trick here is find these campuses that fit you, that you're going to feel comfortable at, that you're going to feel connected to, that you find your own community. My new tip for students who go to a college fair, I challenge you to ask a question to the reps. What do you have at your campus to support students like me? They're going to assume a lot of things based on what you look like. Mm-hmm. If they're smart, they're going to answer they're going to just give you the full gamut. If they just say,
question.
Oh, you're a woman, so we have women's studies. If they say, oh, you appear to be African-American, we have Africana studies. But they may not know I have a disability. They may not know if I have children as a student. They may not know I could be deaf and really talking very well right now. They won't, you see what I mean? They may not know if I have a religious background or political. They may not know if I'm straight or gay. They don't know by just looking at me. A good rep will answer all the way across. They'll ask you a bunch of questions. That's what'll happen. And then they'll understand what you actually need. So you can't, but don't ask it. Can I just throw this in? This is a pet peeve. Did we talk about pet peeves already?
Well, I had one, yeah.
Don't go to a college fair and say, what's this all about?
Do you have biology?
Or go to a college fair and say, so what are you known for? Ask about the major you want. Because if we don't have the major you want, it don't matter what we're known for.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
If you ask me, what are you known for? I'm going to say, oh, we're known for film. We're known for music. We're known for, biology, kinesiology. We can get your students to med school, law school, but you wanted an English major. You didn't ask me that. Mm-hmm. We're not known for an English major. We have an English major. We're not known for that. Do you see what I mean? So you got to be I think authenticity would be the rep's favorite person. If you come with an authentic conversation, to your next session or your next college fair, and even counselors, y'all should calm down as well. Honestly, just ask the question away. Just don't tell the student, don't put us all in one lump. All the campuses are not the same. So don't give them new rules that we didn't give them to follow. You know what I mean? So I think that the whole thing, if we say it's test blind, it's test blind. You're not going to fool the system by sending us test scores.
Right.
You don't get they found the secret language, the secret code, and they sent us test scores. So we're going to use them. We're not using them. If we said we were blind, we're not using them.
Right.
Does that make sense? I don't know.
It does.
Got me riled up today.
Hold on. Let me just do a quick time check. I'm good to keep going. Do y'all have a couple more minutes, or does anybody have a heart out right now? Be real with me.
I don't smell the.
I got a few more minutes.
I got a few more minutes. All right. We're going to extend by a few more minutes, but let's max set 6 minutes. So just some folks who are listening, we're going to extend by 6 minutes, but then we'll call it. Go ahead, Rick. What you got?
Well, I mean, there's so many good pieces there, man. I mean, I hope this is recorded because I'm gonna listen back. But one thing that was so key is this idea of figuring out what your questions are. Not what I liked how, I can't remember who said it earlier, but like what the world tells you versus like, you need to just figure out what matters to you. And Ethan, I know you do a really good job. You give people all kinds of tools for this, but like, what are your kind of big key needs and wants? First of all, those two things are different, and figuring that out, needs and wants. And then asking your questions to as many people affiliated with that college as possible, right? So Rick Clark is director of admission at Georgia Tech. Rick Clark does not have a corner on the market of the truth of the Georgia Tech experience. I mean, we got almost 17,000 undergrads. So just because you don't like the shirt that the tour guide wore, or, you know, the way that they said something, that's one kid at a huge place, right? Or even if it's Smith, you know, sure, Smith doesn't have 17,000, but that's one kid out of their entire undergrad population. Ask a professor the same questions. Ask a recent alum the same questions. Ask a current student. You know, ask a bunch of people, but figure out what matters to you. And because look, people like us, man, we will pull a string in the back of our back and just start rattling off stuff about our school otherwise, you know? And tour guys will do this. They will do the same thing. And, you know, we're gonna dance you around all the prettiest, but we're gonna avoid the dumpsters and all that stuff. You got to get to the things that matter to you, and then ask those questions. There's not a bad question if it matters to you. That's a good question if it matters to you.
I got a big question that I'm curious about, but I hope it doesn't take us past our time, but I'm going to ask it because it's on my head and on my heart, and anybody can answer. We've been talking a little bit about access and equity. Do you feel that things are getting better or things are getting worse? I know I'm offering a false dichotomy.
I'll start.
Please.
And I'm just going to show my optimism. I've got to say better. And not to say that there aren't, you know, I don't know, some obstacles, right, that are being put in our way. You know, equity and inclusion. I mean, arguments against, you know, critical race theory. I mean, all kinds of chatter out there around, you know, where our world is going. But I think, I mean, my optimism is leading me to that this is a great opportunity for, you know, whether it's personal change or institutional change, or having a conversation about how we can, you know, be better people, be better servants of our students, and how can we create environments where our students belong and feel that they belong. We have got to move in that direction. So to me, that means that that things are getting better, because we have been challenged and we have, you know, realized that there are many conversations to be had. And I have got to believe that it's not all talk, that the actions behind the words, these aren't changes that happen overnight. It's a process. It does take time to institute effective change, but I believe that it's going to happen. I do. So I think things are better, getting better.
Final thoughts, so that the pizza doesn't burn. That's why it's not your job to get the pizza. I mean, maybe right now because you're on a session, Rick. But
we'll see. I mean, job versus who actually gets it done, right? Very, very different thing. I'll jump on the good train. I'll jump on the heading towards better train too. You know, I think that one thing I'll say, and I'm sure that CSUN does a great job with this for sure, but I see more schools talking about transfer students, more colleges talking about non-traditional students, more schools giving students opportunities like starting at a different campus or starting at a different term, or, you know, partnerships between colleges. Like, outside of many other ways we could take this question, I think there's been some forced creativity and some forced, agility that is really positive. I mean, just for Georgia Tech this last last week when we had graduation, 20% of the kids who graduated did not start at Georgia Tech. They transferred in. Nationally, that number is, I think, 37 or maybe even 39% of four-year college graduates had at least one other college as part of their background. So that mobility, those opportunities, that is a shift. And I see that actually getting accelerated going forward. So that means access. That means, a bit more of, the equity, right, to providing more kids opportunities for a higher education here.
Well,
I would agree in general with what they've both said. And I think that the more that folks like us who sit on certain committees, I don't get the seat at the real table where all the big decisions are made. But here's my new strategy. I wait outside the door and I just pass out my leaflets as they go, I get in everybody's ear. When that subject comes up, someone's going to say, Gigi mentioned that to me the other day. I think that works. I do. And so what's going on though is you're finding more people in the middle and just below that are starting to I'm not even going to wait for the president and the cabinet to decide that our campus is going to do this. We're going to do this because we have a relationship with those schools. And so that's kind of what's happening on my world right now. There's a group of us that are saying, we know that there's pockets of students who need our help. And even though it's not a policy, we're going to make it a practice. And we're going to make sure that these students get the service that they need to get to our campuses, and to get the find out the information they need earlier. So a lot of that has been quietly happening. There's sort of it's not quiet anymore. I just said it right. But there's sort of like this grassroots kind of thing going on where it's like people who know how, like I can tell you where the windows are. I can tell you what the doors that are open to you, let's make sure you get through those and not have to come up on these, all these obstacles. So in a way, I would say, yes, it is getting better because people are getting smarter about how to help students. Now, eventually the policies will catch up. I believe that. But it's already begun to, how they say it'll get worse before it gets better. We've seen a lot of the worst already. And I think we're headed to the better. And the more we can actually bring real evidence of need to our folks who make those decisions, I think that's better ammunition than just the talk. It's actually being able to say, data speaks so loudly, as you know, it's being able to say this whole school of 300 seniors, has this need and we can provide it. Why aren't we doing it? And let's do it. And then let's see some results. So that's kind of how I see it happening right now.
Thank you. I could talk to y'all all day. This is awesome. I've really enjoyed for whatever it's worth, I've had a great time and I'm so grateful for y'all's time today. There's
some participants that say we should take this on the road. That it's
want to take this on the road? We'll do the tour?
Because we're so hilarious. That's why, right?
This is more than I've laughed on a webinar in a while. The thing I want to say, I want to come back to something that you said at the beginning, Gigi. And what I hope that students and parents and counselors will take away is, Deanna, Rick, Gigi, the folks here are people who have pet peeves and have pizza in the oven and, are funny. We love, these are real people who have, who are willing to, answer questions. I'm not saying everybody needs to go email everybody right now, but I'm saying that when it comes to when y'all have questions and you're wondering about things, please reach out to the school. There are folks that you can talk to get your questions answered. So, I hope that you'll come away from this going, oh, wow, that those folks were kind of cool. Like they were people that seem like they seem pretty cool. So again, I'm not saying go, you can follow Rick on Twitter. That actually Deanna's on Twitter too. Gigi, are you on Twitter too? Anyway, social media.
I had to divorce Twitter. I'm sorry. I don't know.
That's all good. But I hope that what y'all take away from this is that that you can get your questions answered. So anyway, I hope y'all will reach out to schools when you have questions. Thank y'all again. I'm not going to keep you any longer. I'm so grateful. Everybody, we're going to send the recording out, and you'll also get there's a little link. We're going to do some more practical stuff next week about terms of your application and your personal statement and all that. But again, thank y'all, and I hope y'all have an awesome rest of your night and great rest of your week.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
well, thank you. Nice to meet you too, also.
Hey, y'all. Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
You too.